The University of California, Riverside presents Blue, Gold, and Black, the podcast that's dedicated to amplifying Black voices at UCR. I'm Dominique Beale from UCR's Community Engagement and Outreach Unit. In each episode, we'll be talking to UCR students, campus leaders, and community partners to explore the intersection of being Black and being a Highlander at UCR. And I can't wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's get started. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Blue, Gold, and Black podcast. I am Dominique Beale, your host. Today, we have a very special guest whose voice we're going to amplify, Dr. Jennifer Brown, who is our Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education here at UCR. She is also a full professor in our School of Public Policy. And today we're just going to be talking about Dr. Brown's upbringing and some of her past experiences and how she brings all of those experiences here to UCR to further the cause for our students and in particular our Black students. Dr. Brown, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for asking. Of
course. Thank you so much for being here. So I gave you a brief little introduction, but if you can, for our guests, could you please, in your own words, describe to us your positions here at UCR?
Sure. So, hello, everyone. I have the pleasure of being the Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, and sometimes it can be a complicated thing to discuss. I sometimes tell students that if I'm doing my job, you don't know that I exist. But my job really is to think about how to integrate all experiences, mostly academic, but how to integrate experiences where when students come into the university, they have a seamless transition and that they progress through their degree and they finish, hopefully within 4, but sometimes 5 plus years. And so I oversee various organizations throughout the university. So if you've ever taken a summer class, the folks that put that term together report to me, the Vice Provost and Dean. If you have ever gone to UCDC, or UC Sacramento, or you've worked in undergraduate research, you were a Chancellor's Research Fellow, folks who do that work report to the Vice Provost and Dean. If you, any of your faculty who are teaching remote, the folks who are in charge of the Center for Teaching and Learning, which we call Excite, report to me. If you've taken English 1A, 1B, 1C class, or taken the AWPE or the examination of college writing, that group reports to me. If you've been to the ARC, so if you've ever done peer mentoring or tutoring, et cetera, those folks report to me. So, in addition to managing, different areas on campus, I convene different groups like the advising leads for each college, the associate deans. I talk with the faculty senate, the registrar, different folks to make sure that what you all need academically is in place for you to succeed.
That's a lot, to say the least. That's a lot. And, just to kind of give you some credit, it really sounds like everything runs through you when it comes to undergraduate education, at least in some type of way, or you have your finger on the pulse. And you said something interesting about if you're doing your job well, students shouldn't know or won't know that you exist. Can you kind of expand on that sentiment a little bit?
Yeah. So, typically when you come to a university, you probably know your college advisor, you probably know the professors that are in your campus. It took a while, even when I was an undergrad, to understand a dean or what a dean does, or that they were a representative of your particular college, right? And so because I'm not a dean of a particular college, you wouldn't necessarily know to come to me. But I interface with so many different folks on campus, as you put it, my eye is on the pulse. Mm-hmm. Sorry, photobomb of my daughter.
Worries,
who's 5.
That's the deal.
Yeah. But so you wouldn't necessarily know to come to me, right? So I'm speaking with advisors. I'm speaking with folks within the college. I'm the one who sort of is at the institutional level understanding the nuances of different colleges or the things that they need help with. Another thing, just real time, I'll give you an example, is, working with, for example, our folks in student business services or financial aid. So right now, because we're remote, there, is a little bit of a lag time in financial aid response. And so, I hear about this. I may hear about it from an advising lead or supervisor of the advisors. We call them SAMs. That may say, hey, I'm having a lot of students who are having issues with X. I may then go and talk to the folks in financial aid. Can you talk to me about why? And I'll try to broker a deal, figure out how to best help, work with the folks who report to financial aid or up through another person such as myself to try to come up with a solution. So I'm always thinking about how the institution works. So it's sort of the behind the scenes. If you went to a restaurant, you don't know all of the things that happen to get your meal cooked. You just know that you order X and it comes out on the table. So, I'm sort of the person, I'm like a conductor basically, who's trying to put all of these things together.
No, thank you for sharing. Even with my limited experience working in higher education, it can be kind of hard to conceptualize a lot of these positions, especially these more senior leadership-based positions, right? We have the chancellor, then we have an executive vice chancellor, then we have vice chancellors, then we have provosts and deans. Can you talk about, even though you just said, right, it's a lot of behind the scenes action, right? So when a student steps on campus and they see everything popping off at the hub and the machine is running, right? We don't see all of the strings that are being pulled behind the machine. Can you just kind of talk about why it might be important for students to have a little bit, at least a small working knowledge of these various positions and these figures on their campus, so that way they can better grasp the full picture of what this higher education experience is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the interesting things about a campus, if you could envision, so maybe for our incoming freshmen who maybe did not get a chance to do on-campus tour, maybe had to do it virtually, in other times, because I don't know what our new normal will be. We used to come on campus and you say, oh, this is the University of California, Riverside. And, you see beautiful trees and you see, buildings, and then you go to the hub and, you go to your classes. And at least for me, when I was an undergrad, maybe even until I became a professor, it just seemed like one big ecosystem, right? And that it just all works together. And there's so many different parts that have to come together. So for example, for folks who live in the dorms or in the campus apartments, there's a separate entity that takes care of that, right? Called auxiliaries. And, folks who work for housing and dining, are the folks that spend time making sure that there's a housing contract or that your dorm is clean or that the trash is picked up outside. I mean, all of those things work together, right? So we have a grounds crew. We don't think about who's typically mowing the lawn or making sure there's no debris. And I grew up in the Midwest. So, for us, when it snowed, automatically the sidewalks were cleared, right? But we don't think about that as part of the campus infrastructure. There are different groups. So, one key thing that at my level, we talk about what's called academic affairs. So things that have to do with, actual coursework, et cetera. We may have another group called student affairs. And those are folks who are really in charge of, your out of class experience, anything from your clubs and organizations to residential life that might do programming inside of the dorms or inside of the campus apartments. So there are all of these different groups that are coming together to make the ultimate campus experience. And it's actually really cool. It's complicated, but it's very cool.
No, very complicated. But, I would say complicated if you have no prior knowledge, right? But once you have the opportunity to talk to folks like yourself, right, and you do a really good job at kind of just breaking it down and helping a student conceptualize. And it is really just kind of like separate cogs in the machine, right? So one cog is kind of like the academic focus, which is where you're heavily involved in. And then the student affairs side, which helps that cog rotate, right? But it's not academic in nature, as you've once told me, but they still work together to try and create this holistic experience for the student. So just to kind of break away from the work that you're doing here at UCR just for a little bit and to try and add some more context into who you are and what you do. You already mentioned that you grew up in the Midwest, but could you tell us a bit more specifically about where you grew up and the experiences that come with that?
Absolutely. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And, Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the United States. So if you've read Michelle Obama's Becoming book, she talks about how when she grew up and, bless her heart, she's older than me. So, let's say maybe 10 plus year difference where she's saying that when she first moved to the South Side neighborhood, or when her parents first moved to the South Side neighborhood, there were, more Caucasian folks in her neighborhood, or there was a good mixture, right? And as African Americans moved into that neighborhood, you saw a lot of Caucasian, they used to call it white flight, right? They left and went other places. So in the time that I grew up on the south side of Chicago, there was maybe, if you think about a street, or we used to call them blocks in Chicago, where, you had one block of houses, you might have seen like, an older Caucasian person, one person on the block, right? So maybe somebody who still lived there. But ultimately, I grew up around all African Americans. And that really is interesting when I think about my fifth grader who photobombed us and how she grew up. So, a lot of the things that is happening now, maybe I took for granted because I grew up in a place that was, concentrated with folks that look like me. We were taught Black history in our schools. I had a lot of African American teachers. And when I think about it now and how my daughter is growing up, one, she's in a dual immersion school, so she learns all of her subjects in Spanish. And I'm realizing, for example, when we lived in Oregon prior to here, they didn't talk about Black history at all. That she is still in California, the minority in her class, right? So part of us coming to California was for her to be able to integrate and interact and be around folks that look more like her, right? Olive hues, brown hues. But by the nature of the school that she goes to, she still is primarily around Latinx folks, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's a great thing, right? She gets this opportunity that I've never had. But I didn't understand at the time when I grew up how special being around folks, not having to question, that there were other folks that don't look like me. And I'll even go this step, this next step, because in California, where most people have pools, the conversations that we have to have, Mom, do I have to put my swim cap on, right? Because I feel embarrassed about putting my swim cap on when other folks can just jump in the pool and their hair gets wet, etc. These weren't things we had to talk about growing up in Chicago, because everybody put their swim cap on because this wasn't the style back then, and our hair was long, and it took a long time to get it done.
Right.
So there are definitely differences from where I come from, and although I feel that my daughter is living a life that is different from me, which is what she should have with a mom who has a PhD, there are some things that come along with that. And just really quickly, I'll share, one friend shared with me a while back when I was thinking about moving to Oregon from Indiana, which is where I started professionally. And he said, with your socioeconomic status, it's just never going to be the same, right? It's never going to be the way you grew up in Chicago. And so you just have to think about, how do you instill values and make sure she understands who she is?
And what I think of instantly is just socialization, right? How do we socialize our Black children to navigate this world, pretty much? And I think, another term that I think of a lot is just like this concept of cognitive dissonance, right? Specifically because your daughter is growing up with plenty opportunity, right? A lot of opportunity that you weren't able to take advantage of. And I think as great as that is, I think what you're saying, kind of like how you took your upbringing for granted, is in order to achieve more opportunity, to achieve more resources for the next generation. There's a weird thing that happens in America where you have to remove yourself from the community at some level in order to obtain those things, right? And as simple as being, instead of one of 3 Black children in the classroom, there's 25 of y'all. And that goes a long way. And can you just, I guess, really kind of focus more so in being able to look back at your upbringing in hindsight, some of the Black experiences that you faced in Southside Chicago that helped reinforce your identity as a Black woman as you got older and started getting ready to venture out into college and in the real world and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for bringing us back to that point. I think that just the fact that there were folks that looked like me, I didn't have to question, right? So, sorry, she is my frame of reference, kinky hair versus hair that is straight. Everybody had kinky hair. Maybe some had relaxed hair, but everyone's hair looked like me. So I never, the questions that she goes, that she thinks about, I've never had to think about. She's going to be 10 and, she's starting to develop attractions for different things, what she likes and what she doesn't like. And again, when you're raised on the south side of Chicago, where everyone in your class, it wasn't until I went to high school that there was someone of a different race in my class. And that still was pretty rare, right? So there's never a thought about what is it like to be attracted to someone who's not your race, or I didn't understand that folks had teachers that didn't look like them. It was the opposite, the complete reverse when I went to college, where I'm like, where are the Black folks? Where are my Black professors? Because it never occurred to me that there wouldn't be any, because there were, the school teachers were integrated. Not everyone was African American, but there were more African American teachers than there were anything else, right? So it was never searching for someone who looked like me, because everyone was an automatic role model. It was something I didn't even have to think about. The neighborhood folks were like me, right? You had, folks who maybe didn't go to school and got into a little trouble. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But even they knew who the smart kids were, and they weren't going to mess with them, or they were going to make sure that you went to school. Or I remember even one time I was going to the store to get something for my mom, and these group of young boys were like, what are you doing outside, right? Because my mom didn't let me go outside a lot. And so they know these are the folks who are doing X, and we're not going to either bring them into, these other situations. And it's just different, So it increased self-esteem, because there was never a question of whether I could do something or not. It was, this is what I was going to do. I was going to college.
No, and I like that you kind of brought up that concept of one community, right? Because like you said, we all know folks that, partake in different types of lifestyles, but it's still that aspect of like, we gonna make sure you get to school safe, or you're the good student who has scholarship opportunity. You don't need to be out here type of stuff. But what I also loved is that you brought up self-esteem, identity, self-image. All of those things are so important for Black children. And even, with experiences that I have with my daughter. We've kind of gotten over that hump a little bit, but my full disclosure, my baby was bald for like the first 2.5 years. But once her hair started coming in extremely curly, similar to mine. My mother is white, and so she has a white grandma, and so she developed an infatuation with straight hair. She always asked, "Can I get my hair straight?" And this, that, and I had to like drill into her, right? Until you learn to love the hair that you have, we can't do those things. Not yet, not frequently, because it's important that you understand that this is who you are.
Yes.
And straight hair is no better than kinky, curly hair, or whatever you want to describe it as. So that whole idea of self-esteem and self-image, that maybe you don't have to think about as critically when you're immersed in your people, in your culture, right? But, again, back to what we said, affording opportunities kind of pulls us away from that in some regards. And so we have to have different conversations with, the younger generation. And so thank you for sharing that. And you just mentioned you always knew that you were going to go to college. Was that something that was inspired to you right by your parents? Was it something that was just innate to you? Like, that's what you wanted to do? Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with education.
Yeah, absolutely. So my mother was a strong proponent of education. So I don't know, to be honest, if I can separate out whether it came from me or from her, but there was never a if. It was, where are you going? My mom was a person, she's alive, so she is a person who used to take us to the suburbs where I would say the bigger houses were, to give us something to aspire to. And I remember, if you ever played, that's my car, or, that's my house, had already picked one out. And I knew in order to get that house, I needed to have an education. So she made sure that I was in the best schools that she could get me in. We weren't in private school or anything like that. We were in public school. But she was active, she was involved, and she didn't accept mediocrity. So, if you came home with a C and you were like, I did what I could, that was not good enough. I wasn't watching the Cosby Show for the next term until I got my grades back up. So she instilled that in me. She is a college graduate. She was a non-traditional student. In fact, she went to school at DePaul in Chicago, which was a commuter campus at that time. So, she didn't have the going away to college, going to a dorm experience, but she knew that education changed lives, right? And so when I transferred to high school, it was I'm going to say 99.9% African-American high school, but it was one of the top 5 high schools in the Chicagoland area. And they had over a 90% placement rate in going to college. I was in Upward Bound, and I remember sometimes trying to skip tutoring to do other stuff. That's when those neighborhood people were like, "What are you doing outside? Go to tutoring." They didn't say that, but that's what they were saying. So it was my mom who just, there was no other way. And so, I would go on the college tours with Upward Bound. And I wanted to go to college. Back then, a different world was on. I mean, that was something you wanted to experience. You wanted to have that experience. And I couldn't wait to leave and go have that experience.
Get a little bit of freedom, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Go out and hit the streets in a responsible way.
Yes.
Yes. We'll just leave it right there.
But yeah, it's my mom. And I really appreciate everything that she's done for me. I think that she led me to college, but then I had to do the work. And I think that's what I really want to share with folks who may listen to this. I had to do the work, and it wasn't a straight path. I flunked out of school. I had to go to a community college. I had to work and get my grades back up. I had to transfer back. There were points in time where I feel like I disappointed my mom. I disappointed myself. But I persevered through it, right? And I can say with no shame that was my path. And it was my path for a reason. I think it allows me to understand different things that happen with students in my role now, right? Because not every student is coming straight from high school. In fact, I was with some students the other day, some student parents who, have all types of circumstances. So, anyway, just back to the motivation, it was never a question of if, it was just when. But when I finally got my groove, I fell in love with education. And if someone was to tell me today that I would be the vice provost and dean, or that we'd even be having this conversation, I would say no way. I was just a young Black girl from the South Side of Chicago. And now I have this opportunity to help other folks and show them how much education can change their life.
And let's kind of talk a little bit about that perseverance that you had to display throughout college, because I was the same way. Well, luckily I didn't get expelled. I was on my third strike though, and I had the deans and the academic advisors at the Game of Thrones table, and they were like, "Yo, we feel for you, man, and we empathize with you, but this is your last chance. Anything lower than a C minus even, like, you're out of here." And I had to get my stuff together. I had to take responsibility over the lack of support that I was receiving, because I wasn't going out and getting that support. And I think, especially like when we look at Black students and we look at retention rates across the country and things of that nature, like, Black students are getting into college. They're not finishing the way that they should. So talk to us a little bit about that perseverance, a little bit in more detail, to try and let students know that this is something that is obtainable. You're going to hit those low points, right? But you can overcome it. And some of the things that you did in particular to overcome some of those struggles that you faced in college.
Absolutely. Well, so one of the things I think a lot of folks may resonate with is, if you think about when you go to college, and especially if you're the first in your family or one of the few who might be able to obtain this dream, there are folks that can be your cheerleaders, but at some point may not know how to support you. And I think about, I'm trying to think of the best way to try to explain this. Sometimes you have 2 feet, and one time, sometimes one foot is in one world and one foot is in another world. And you have these tensions where maybe, let's say, your left foot, it's what you are comfortable and used to. And you have to find a way to assimilate into this other world, right? And I'm going to use that as college, where there are less knowns, more unknowns, and sometimes the advice and information that you might have gotten from your mom, a family member, whoever, if they've never experienced that world, they may not be the best people to give you that advice. And that's hard. Now, for me, my mother went to college, but when I went to graduate school, that was a totally different beast. And I had to actually stop listening to some of the things that she was sharing with me. I even had to explain some things to her. I remember we used to talk a lot, just about every day. And when I was working on my master's degree, there was a point where you have to write a thesis, and if sometimes if you lose that thought, you're never going to get it back. And I remember she called, and I had to tell her, I can't talk to you right now, right? Because I have to finish writing my results, and sometimes I don't get those thoughts back. And she was offended, and her feelings were hurt. If I bring this back to the undergraduate experience, and I hear this a lot with first generation students, and it doesn't matter the ethnicity, but, sometimes students are facing explaining why they are going to school as opposed to a path that maybe another family member thinks they should, pursue. Yeah. And you have these tensions, and you're trying to figure out these unknowns, these unwritten rules that you don't know. Some people have never told you, if you walk in 10 minutes late, the professor has their eye on you, and they're going to always be looking to find a way to challenge you. And I'm making this up fictitiously, but it can be true in some ways. And so I think, the hard thing is to figure out how to navigate and how to find somebody who has gone through this before. To find a mentor is the best thing that you can do. In the time that I was in undergrad, it took me 5.5 years to finish, but I finished. And there were these angels that just out of nowhere, I mean, they were real people, but I see them as angels, people who were placed in my life at different points in time that either helped me get over a hump or pushed me through a certain scenario. But I had to be open to them. And I'll share with you, not all of them look like me, which was different for me, right? And so it's being open to some of the uneasiness that you're going to feel when you step on campus as a Black scholar, and understanding and letting go of the need to be right all of the time and the need to feel like you know everything. No one knows everything. Not even the folks you think know everything, know everything. And so it's an acclimation of letting go of that left foot a little bit and moving it over to the right side, so that you can be in this other world that is a little bit uncomfortable.
And I'm glad that you talked about it, because it just kind of keeps up with the theme that I've been experiencing throughout all of these interviews and mentorship, right? But particularly like how, and I think, it gets a little bit more complicated even within the Black community between the older generation and the younger generation. And it's just lived experience. The older generation had to do X, Y, and Z to get to where they're at. And the younger generation has to do A, B, C to get to where they want to go. And so I agree with you. I always try to, let students know, like, you have to be open to receiving resources, to be receiving guidance. And, a lot of our students come in with that chip on their shoulder. They have to work extremely hard to get here. They have to work even harder to stay. And sometimes you can kind of feel like the work that you're putting in might be invalidated if you go to the tutoring center, if you go to the psychological center, if you go to African student programs, right? Or if you go and try and reach out to a Dr. Brown for guidance. And so just to kind of like flip it now that you are where you're at, just to kind of give the other side, like talk to us about how critical it is for folks like you in positions like you to meet these students where they're at. Because I'm not going to lie, if I'm a Black student walking into campus and I feel like I need resources, or maybe I see Dr. Brown and you're the first Black face that I see on campus, and then I see that you're the vice provost and dean of undergraduate education while being a full professor all of those titles can be very intimidating for a young student who just doesn't know any better. Yeah. So from your vantage point, how important is it to meet students where they're at to try and help them be more open to engaging in resources or asking for help?
So it is one of my favorite things to do, is to meet students, but particularly when you talk about meeting students where they're at, just come as your authentic self. That's really, if you have, 2 feet in both worlds, let's just be honest about that, right? You have to just come and say, this is an experience that I don't know what's going to happen, So if I just backtrack for just a second, there's nobody on this earth that could have told me that I was going to be in a position like this at my age doing what it is that I'm doing, right? I believe it to be hard work and it to be a blessing, but I have to be open to people's criticism, constructive criticism, right? Things that are going to help me to be better. So going back to your question, meeting students where they're at, I'll be honest with you. Not everybody is going to be Dr. Brown. Not everyone is going to be able to openly sit here and say, I flunked out of school and I got back up and, I was a professor and I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It is your job to authentically take in the conversations that you have with folks, and you'll get a vibe to help you see whether this is someone you can approach. I hope to be that person. I hope if you meet me, you can see that, I might be busy and on my way to something, but that you can see that I am concerned and that I care about students. And I hope that you would reach out. If I see students on campus and I see them, particularly over and over again, I usually stop them and say hi. And I hope that you're receptive to that, when we get back to a place that we can get on campus and stop and see each other.
Right.
But you have to be open. One other thing that I just want to share is it doesn't have to be me. And I hope you heard many times that not everybody looked like me. So it could be a professor that you just kind of, hit it off with. It could be a TA that you like. It could be a friend. But it's really important to think about a couple of different things. One is you're paying tuition and fees, whether it's through financial aid, whether it's, scholarships. Somebody is paying your bill to be here. And one thing I didn't realize when I was going to school, I was telling my daughter this the other day. When you fail a class, you pay for it again. This isn't, remember, I was raised in public school. So, I didn't fail things, but it's offered again, you take it. But when you think about that you're paying X amount of dollars per class, plus whatever fees you're paying, when you don't do well, and this isn't for people who just, if you fail something, you didn't get it, that's a different story, right? And then you have to take it again. Those things happen too, happen to me. But
yes.
For folks who maybe are just not going to class, or I wasn't doing X, or I got caught up more into this, and therefore I didn't do well, and now I have to take it again. I didn't think about the economics of I'm paying twice for something, and now I'm real cheap. I don't want to pay for anything more than what I have to. The other thing is, seriously, because that's how you keep your money, right? Mm-hmm. If we're not spending it all the time and we're saving it, then we can, aspire to do some other things. The other thing too, though, is with your fees, you're paying for, these free resources. Well, they're not free technically, but you're paying for these resources to be available to you, right?
Yes.
So the ARC. When I went to school, we had a group of peer mentors that were African American, and they sat us down and they gave us sort of the rules of the University of Illinois. And they basically were saying, when you see another Black person on campus, you speak to them, right? Because at that time, probably still now, weren't that many of us, and you recognize somebody else who was able to get into this university. Mm-hmm. The other thing too was, if I saw a Black face on campus, I could automatically talk to them. And I know now we're in our phones. I'm even sometimes in my phone, as we're walking past. But we have to build these connections. And I hope that COVID has shown you that social connection is important. But going back to these fees and thinking about, these services, the ARC and, writing support and all of these other things, you're paying for that. Why would you say, I don't need it? No one is judging you if you go to these services. And in fact, this is where I was going with the peer mentors. That was one of the first things they told us. Sign up for the tutor before you even know you need it.
I'm so happy that you're touching on this, because I tell students that all the time. I'm like, because I think back to my undergrad experience and how underutilized all of the resources were, by me. I was only doing tutoring because I failed a class, or I was only going to my academic advisor because I'm on probation. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm struggling, and that's why I'm using the resources as opposed to being proactive. But I tell students, you're going to pay, $15,000 a year to come to a UC institution, UCR, hopefully. Within that $15,000, there's probably like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of resources that are at your disposal. It's not cheap to go and get a psychological counselor if you're going through mental health issues, right? That's a resource that you have at your disposal. If a show ain't cheap to travel to another country for X amount of weeks to months to study and do these types of things, you can study abroad, right? Academic tutoring and stuff. There's people that pay hundreds and thousands of dollars, right, for their students to get the tutoring that they need. That's at your disposal. Career training, that's at your disposal. And so if you're not using these resources, you're extracting no value out of the cost of your tuition and fees. And that's the difference that students need to understand. Your tuition and fees cost what they cost. But how valuable, right? How much does that dollar cost? And if you're not extracting the resources out of your university, all of that value within that $15,000 gets lost. So thank you for kind of emphasizing that point to our students. So we're coming close on time. I just have a few questions to wrap up. In kind of bringing it back to your position as the Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, you're here to serve all of our students, period. But how do we still, and more so for people who find themselves in senior leadership positions like you, how do you navigate and keep Black students centered in the work that you're doing to help all students? I hope I asked that question good enough.
Yeah. Just one thing I want to point out to your last question. Every resource I've told you all about, I've used. I've used tutoring. I've gone to counseling. Nothing wrong with any of that. And it helps with clarity, and it helps you to be a better person. So I just want to share that, I am a personal testament that I'm not telling you to do anything that I've never done.
Myself included. I had to take therapy in college. It's necessary. It's absolutely necessary.
It is. But to answer your question about, helping all students, but also, thinking about how do I be of service to our African-American students, I don't know how to answer that outside of saying I'm an African-American woman, right? And you're right. I want to make sure that all students have an opportunity at education because, again, I have seen how it has changed my life. As a professor, I traveled all around the world. Before I had my child, I traveled all around the world. I remember the first time going to Africa for free, through a grant where, I remember my mom calling me on my cell phone saying, "Do you feel the ancestors?" Because she was so proud that I was there.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm saying that as a tangent quickly to let you know that there are things I've done that just I have never imagined. So when I use that as my North Star, right, of I'm here to help better students, to empower students, anything that I can do to help them with the caveat that they have to do their own work, right? I'm not, giving you the answers to the test, but I'm going to push you to study and maybe follow up and check up on you. I do that for any student. Now, I'll tell just one 30-second quick story. My daughter just finished her first round of braces, and there was this African-American woman who was the person who changed her rubber bands and stuff like that. She was very cool. And I know she was nice to all the kids, but I know she gave my daughter extra love. And that's the only way I can think about answering that question. I'm here to help all students. I'm going to help any student that I see. But when I see my African-American sisters and brothers, I want to make sure that they know I'm here. I'm going to make sure that I take the time to strike up a conversation with them. From this podcast, you can already tell I'm here and I'm available. We can have lunch. We can have virtual lunch. We can have lunch in groups. We can have lunch individually. But, I'm here to answer your questions, to help you understand how to navigate, to help you understand how to work with your professors, ones that like you and ones that don't. So I think that's my answer to that question. There's nothing like your own. Although, when I think about it from a humanities standpoint, I want everybody to get an education. But I share a little extra love.
No, and I love the honesty and the almost the simplicity of the answer, because it's just about being seen, right? And seeing the humanity in folks. And, you know, our people have had a history of being denied humanity, right? So that's why something as simple as you walking down the street, you catch eyes with another black person, we give that head nod or, that slight salute. Like, I see you. I know that you're here. I know that you're a real person. And I'm here for you, right? And so I appreciate you sharing that. And so I want students to kind of just take away all of the things that go into making this higher education experience here at UCR. And Dr. Brown is a key figure in all of that experience. So the last question that I have for you, because this has been a great conversation, and we're definitely going to have you back on to keep pushing this conversation forward. But the last question, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but when we think about future generations of Black scholars that are going to come through UCR, what is your most optimistic vision of the future for them?
Oh, wow. That's a big and deep question.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, my optimistic future for generations to come is that whatever our students are going through now, we will have fought through or found a solution for some of the things that we are facing.
Yeah.
So this sounds bad, but if there are challenges, let them be new challenges, right? Let us, this morning when I woke up, I do a little meditation, and then for about 5-10 minutes, I go on my Instagram and my Facebook. It is my mindless, thing to do before I get into a very heavy day. And one of my cousins had on his Facebook a sign that said something about please stop killing us. And he says this was from 50 years ago. So this is what I mean by if we have challenges, please let us have solved, the challenges of today, and let there be new challenges of tomorrow. That is what I hope. I don't think we're going to have a rose-colored future where there's nothing that we need to overcome. But, can we get through, what's happening with killing our Black folks? Can we get through a place where we are seen and acknowledged, without having to do extra effort? And I know we're at the close, but I just feel compelled to say this. I am virtually a fifth grade teacher when I'm not a professor or the vice provost and dean. And one of the things she's working through right now is the Constitution. How do you talk with your child about the 3/5 compromise, that you were 3/5 of a person? So again, my short answer is, let us have new challenges. Let us have solved some of the things that we are going through today.
No, that's beautifully said. And, it goes, one of the things that my dad used to tell me a lot is like, make new mistakes. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I have to tell you the same thing 5 times, like, I'm hot. You make a new mistake, I have a little bit more leniency, right? Because that's a new thing that we have to work through. And, he didn't say it as nice as that all the time, but that was the general principle behind it. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Brown, we super love having you on the Blue, Gold, and Black podcast. We're super happy to amplify your voice today. I think your words are going to hit with a lot of students or a lot of individuals that will come across this. So we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun. I hope what I said made sense, and I hope that folks get, something out of it. We are here to help you. Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. And I worry about that all the time. Even when I'm asking my question, I'll be like, man, I feel like I just rambled on and I don't know if they understood me, but someone's going to hear it and it's going to impact someone. And that's what we're looking for. So thank you once again. Everybody, make sure you check us out, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys later. Thank you for joining us on Blue, Gold, and Black. This program is produced by the Community Engagement and Outreach Unit of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California, Riverside. Learn more about attending UCR by visiting admissions.ucr.edu, and be sure to check out the description for other useful links and resources. Help support this podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And be sure to check out our podcast videos on YouTube. Catch you guys later.